Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. I'm really excited about the panelists that we have with us today. You know, these sessions that we have been holding for the past year really is intended to get the perspectives from local leaders in law enforcement around how they're engaging with their communities, how they're bringing their residents together in a meaningful way so that voices are being heard. And as you kind of think about public safety in these really dynamic times, what are they doing that is actually helping the community to move forward? My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for a company called Polco. We work around engagement with communities and helping to assess performance. And we've designed these sessions to get the perspectives of leaders in law enforcement to help understand what's working around the important responsibility of engagement. You know, with all of the challenges that we're confronting today, it really ends up to be a really important topic. And so I'm really excited that you'll be able to review this panel conversation. Here's how the day is going to progress. I will do a quick introduction of the panelists and then ask them to add a little bit of color to their backgrounds. We'll hop into 3 questions that I have provided to the panelists ahead of time. And then at the end, when we're through the questions, we'll have a little bit of an opportunity for providing additional input that anybody has or sharing interactions between the panelists. But generally, and it has been true throughout the course of the year that we've done these panels, is that I hope you pick up a new perspective and something that you can use in your daily work, or if you're not connected with local government, that you're able to just understand and appreciate the work and the challenges that are around public safety. So with that, let me kick into the introductions. Very happy to introduce JT Manoushagian. He's been the Chief of Police for Lake Worth, Texas Police Department since 2019. In addition to his service in Lake Worth, he also serves as an intelligence officer in the United States Navy Reserve. Prior to his commissioning, he spent 5 years in the U.S. Navy as a Master at Arms military policeman. And he comes to this panel conversation with a wealth of education and qualifications, including certificates from the Leadership Executive and Administrative Development Program from Texas Christian University and the Law Enforcement Management Institute of Texas Leadership Command College. One of the things I always love when I meet leaders like you, JT, is your service to the community. And so I'm really happy to see that you're serving on the board of directors for the Alliance for Children, which is a child advocacy center serving the greater Tarrant area. JT, thank you for being part of the conversation. I would really welcome you to just add a little bit of more color to your background.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. As you mentioned, JT Manoushagian. I'm born and raised right here in Texas. Grew up in a small town just outside of Fort Worth called Bridgeport. And it was there I started in public service at 17 years old. I became a dispatcher and have now kind of moved all through the ranks. So I'm familiar with all areas of law enforcement. The vast majority of my career prior to promoting was spent in K-9. So that's a particular area that I am very passionate about. But other than that, I'm married to a beautiful young lady. My most proud accomplishment is my marriage. We celebrate 15 years this year. And we have 5 beautiful children together.
That's super. Congratulations on all of those things. How large is your department, JT?
I'm sorry?
How large is your department?
So we have 30 sworn and about 10 civilian support staff. We're a city of about 2.5 square miles situated on the northwest corner of Fort Worth, Texas, which is the 2nd fastest growing city in the country. And as a small community, we facilitate the movement of about 250,000 people per day. So we have major highways that come through the city.
Yeah, that's major. Well, listen, thank you for joining the conversation. Really look forward to, particularly with your canine background, it'd be interesting to think about engagement, creative engagement techniques that you have used in that program that you might want to share with folks. So thanks.
You bet.
Let me introduce Scott Goss, who has spent over 20 years with the Daytona Beach Police Department, reaching the rank of Deputy Chief before his retirement a few months ago. As you can imagine, Scott has worked and supervised in almost every division in the department, which is over 200 police employees, and a budget of approximately $24 million. He's had one of the really cool things about Scott that I'm learning is he's had responsibility for overseeing public safety and commanding major events in the day, like the Daytona 500, summer race events, Bike Week, Bike Oktoberfest, Spring Break, and high-level dignitary visits, 2 presidential visits at major events. Very cool stuff, Scott. He also teaches on the local, state, and federal levels in special areas, special events management, critical incident management, and investigative techniques, really sharing his skills and professional experience with others in the profession. Scott, thank you for joining this conversation. You and I have had the opportunity to talk a couple of times, but really happy that you're able to share your experiences around the whole engagement topic. You want to add anything more?
Wow, you covered a lot. You made me sound very impressive. No, much like the chief that you just spoke, I too am near and dear to K9. That was my first specialized unit position. So when he said that, it kind of brought a smile to my face and brought back a lot of really good memories. I wish I could have stayed there a lot longer than I did, but you pretty much summed it up. Almost 22 years, Daytona Beach Police Department, and it was a great experience, and just looking forward to learning more from this panel and adding what little bit I can add to it.
That's great. It's so cool too to be able to spend your career in a department because you just get so deep into the community overall. So what a fortunate career that you had. Thanks a lot, Scott, for spending some time here today.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate your time.
Let me introduce our final panelist. Brian Benton is the interim police chief in Mokena, Illinois. He has been there only for a short period of time, but he actually has retired from the Joliet Police Department where he was chief. He was there for 28 years. And the Joliet, of course, is a very large department, big city, 150,000 residents. He had an authorized staff of almost 300 sworn officers, and he also ran a dispatch center that employed another 65. So a lot of really big city kinds of activities. He's certified through the Illinois Association Chiefs of Police and has actually received the Illinois State Crime Commissioner's Award of Excellence in Law Enforcement. So congratulations on that, Brian. Brian has brings a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a master's degree in public safety administration, and has also gone through the Public Safety School of Police Staff and Command and the Police Institute Research Forum, Senior Management Institute for Police. Brian, you've got a really great career and background. I'm really glad that you're able to share your skills with Mokena now, but I'd love it if you can just add a little bit more to your background.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Well, you hit on all the key points, but I'll tell you a little bit about when I first started back in 1990. Joliet was a town of about 75,000 people, and throughout my career, we've seen it grow to the 3rd largest city in the state of Illinois. So I had a great opportunity there to experience that growth, experience a number of different areas. While I never did get to work K9, I spent about 10 years of my career working narcotics, did an undercover role for 3 years in the task force, and then we started our own drug unit. So a lot of background in the narcotics world. I also managed the SWAT team for about 20 years there too. So very tactic oriented background. And then I switched over to management. The last 10 years of my career, I spent in the administrative level, learned a lot in that role. And then the last 5 as chief. So I'm here in Mokena now for about the past 2 months, settling in. But I still have a lot to learn about managing a small community, a small department in the community compared to a big city. So I'm eager to learn.
Yeah, that's great. And it's cool that you are in now a different size department. One of the things I've learned through these conversations, though, when you think about engagement and what engagement's all about, it really doesn't matter the size of the jurisdiction because the responsibility of connecting with your residents is a universal kind of value. And so the ways you do it maybe will vary, but the importance and the relevance of doing that, of assuming that responsibility is one of these universal things. So I'm glad that you'll be able to bring the large city as well as the smaller city perspective today. Thanks a lot, Chief, for being part of this conversation today.
Thank you.
Well, let me kick off the topic. The name of the session is called Putting Police Needs and Expectations into a Community Context. I served as a city manager in Minnesota for over 30 years. And I have to say that throughout my career, public safety in all departments played such a critical role in developing and maintaining a quality of life for the residents and businesses and stakeholders, visitors. And so as you start to think about the leadership roles that all of you play leading your department, I got to start off by just simply saying you've got my utmost respect for the work that you're doing. I think the value that you bring to the table, especially in these challenging times, is just so critical, particularly with all the dynamics that are impacting communities, the civil unrest, the political divisiveness that's going on, of course, the pandemic and all of the impacts that that's had on not only police activities, but just overall community and organizational issues that have occupied your lives and our lives for a very long period of time. So getting into this conversation about engagement is a really important thing, and the hope is that you'll be able to share some of your perspectives on that. Let me just give a little bit of a backdrop to where I come from. We did a national survey using a standardized tool that's called the National Police Services Survey. And we did it in 2018 as well as 2020. And so it essentially was pre-COVID, pre-George Floyd, and then we reassessed resident sentiment in 2020, post-George Floyd, in the heart of COVID. And we're actually now in the process of doing it again. And while the report is very, very deep with just a wealth of information, because it's a standardized survey and had over 2,000 people participating in both conversations, I wanted to share with you resident priorities and the shift in resident priorities that have happened over the 2 years. And so the chart you see in front of you shows you the shift in resident sentiment. Generally, what you will see is that priorities overall stay pretty much in alignment with where they were in 2018, with the exception of a couple of areas, which kind of ties then into this conversation. Increasing connections with the community and increasing resident accessibility to police. Both of those areas actually increased in 2020. And I think it probably makes sense to all of us. People recognize the importance and the critical nature of needing to be connected to their communities, and particularly in the law enforcement world, to have more opportunities to connect in positive ways with the police department. And so getting into this conversation about engagement at this time is really in response to the priorities that we have determined to exist and the shift between 2018 and 2020. There are, in order to kind of explore this, we're gonna ask you 3 questions. And the first one is, what role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services? We want to kick into what strategies do you use for managing community expectations? I've had some close colleagues of mine say, once you understand police priorities or resident priorities around policing, it's a whole different thing to be able to manage those expectations, because as you all and we all know, people, once they identify an issue, they want to have it solved immediately. And so that management issue is an important part of it. And then finally, what tools and strategies are you using? Particularly if you could share how you're getting to your harder to reach populations. Those kind of ideas are really helpful for people who are watching these sessions, just to learn a little bit more. So with that, let me kick into the questions. And Chief Manoushagian, I'd love to just start with you. Can you talk about the role that the community plays in guiding and influencing the delivery of police services in Lake Worth?
Sure. So we are heavily focused on the fundamental Peelian principles here at Lake Worth. One of my most favorite is that the police are the people and the people are the police. And so I think when you look at the expectations of the community, if you can take off your police hat and you can try to look at the problem or the issue through the lens of the community member, it helps you better address it as a law enforcement leader. I like to say that as a police chief, my attention's divided. I've got 50% of my attention pointed inward to the department and managing internal operations. And then I have another 50% that is directed at the community, and that's understanding their expectations, trying to figure out what strategies they prefer over ones that they don't. And then I come back and I'm supposed to be this synergistic point where those two sides collide. And I do a lot of translating. So I take kind of civilian community terminology and translate it into a language that police officers can understand. And then I do the same for the officers back to the community. And so we don't manage crime per se. We do spend a lot of our time managing perceptions of crime. So understanding it and understanding what the end result the community expects is key for any police department to have success.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up, do you manage the perception of crime? Because that's a really valid statement. One of the things that came out of that survey is we know that only 50% of your population has had interactions with a police officer over the last 12 months. And so the perception of crime and the perception of public safety issues is such an important thing to get your arms around that. And so as you start thinking about engagement, particularly with those folks who haven't had any engagement, I'm excited to kind of hear what you're doing to actually help those folks appreciate the work that you're doing. And, you know, the notion of people are police and police are people, the humanization of the law enforcement world is such a critical thing because you are members of the community, and that's a really important thing. That was very well stated. I really appreciate that.
Bet.
Deputy Chief Goss, can you talk about the role the community plays in the delivery of police services while you were in Daytona Beach?
Well, I mean, much like the chief just mentioned, you know, the police are the community and the community are the police. I believe that principle because for me to be an effective police service provider, you have to recognize not necessarily the severity, but the impact that policing issues have on your constituency, on your community. So the community largely dictates not only the response to the crime, but the type of response that we would have to a certain area. So Daytona, for instance, has a very broad spectrum. We have the center of the city, which has a large urban population, very dense housing, very underserved in a lot of ways. And then the outskirts of our town, we have more influential, if you will, neighborhoods. So the way that we would serve those neighborhoods different. They interact with the police different. We have to interact with those neighborhoods differently, with those peoples, and the concerns that come out of them are different. So you have to know by the police being the people and the people being the police, not to completely take the chief's terminology, but if you know the people you're serving and you know the expectations within that particular area, whether it be a district, a zone, or whatever, then you can further meet the needs of those people in that area. So the community, if you will dictate the response. And you know, I think that one of your other questions is how to manage those, and that's a completely separate topic. But you know, you have to take all of that in, and then you have to develop your game plan based on staffing and needs, and go out and do the best job that you can with the resources that you have available to you, which now is becoming harder and harder because, especially with the larger organizations, there's manpower issues, and that's a topic that when we're talking sometimes about crime prevention and crime strategies and community interaction, that I personally feel we have to be honest with the community about. And again, I think that's another one of your things, and I'll get into more of that when we really talk about expectations. But you have to be realistic with the people you're serving. I would use the word constituent, but it sounds too much like I'm a politician, which I'm not. But with your constituency, you have to be honest with them when you're getting these wants and these needs about what level of service you can provide to them.
Scott, in the kind of in the city, the prioritization of community input in a community like Daytona Beach, where you've got so many non-residents visiting the community, how do the non-resident, I totally appreciate the points you're bringing up about the different income levels and the different ways you need to connect with different parts of your community, but how would you respond to the question about how do visitor input, how does visitor input impact the delivery of services in Daytona Beach? Anything come to mind?
it affects it because the police department is so visible. Anytime you're working an event, much like Chief Benton knows with Chicagoland. So around the track, and Daytona International Speedway, for those of you who don't know, sits in the center of the city. It is literally a miniature city within the city. So especially now post 9/11, when you have that, you are going to have a ton of law enforcement. That's the same with all of our other events. We're going to be high profile. We're going to be high presence. So you want that interaction and you want those needs of those visitors to be met, because if not, it's 2021. You start getting bad reviews. People post on Facebook, people post here, people post there. I had a bad interaction. Well, not so much personally it hurts, because then you start getting phone calls from City Hall about, why do we get a bad review from about an officer? So the needs of the visitors are very important, and we pay attention to those because we want to serve them, because while they're in our city, they're ours. But you have to watch it, I think, because any other, manager will tell you, if the citizens, the full-time citizens of your area, get the sense that you are paying too much attention to the events or letting the visitors, if you will, get away with more, do more than the full-time residents, then you start having a conflict and it becomes somewhat of an us versus them mentality. So it can be very tricky I hope I answered what you were asking, but
Yeah. No,
very tricky to manage it.
no, you did. I mean, it's such a balancing act. I totally appreciate the need for balancing the needs of people who are coming into your community for an event and people who are paying the taxes.
Well, and it goes back to expectations too. There's been people that have lived 5 blocks from that speedway that will still call and complain every year about the noise. There are people on the beach side that live 2 blocks off of Main Street that will still complain every year about Bike Week. But then you talk to them, and part of the reason they moved to Daytona was because of Bike Week and because of the track. So
it's that decision, the investment decisions people make for investing in a community, and in a lot of respects, it's all about quality of life. So thanks, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Chief Benton, can you talk about the role that communities play in the delivery of police services in Mokena?
Sure, Matt. Well, the community plays a key role in police service delivery. Without community input, the police would simply be ineffective in deploying our resources, responding to crimes. We need the citizens in the community to work with us, to share information, to have a level of trust and rapport that allows them to act as our eyes and ears in the community. They need to relay back to us what they learn and basically help us learn more about those issues that affect their quality of life. At the same time, it's imperative that the police relay back to the citizens that we're empathetic to their concerns and we're working diligently to help find solutions to their problems. I've always been a big proponent of community policing and problem solving. I was hired back in 1990 under a community policing grant, and the way community policing, the philosophy of problem solving, was implemented in the Joliet Police Department was pervasive. It was a way of doing policing that we weren't used to leading up to that, and basically it required that we include the community in all aspects of our decision making on how to deploy resources. The other chiefs both commented that Sir Robert Peely came up with these Peelian principles back in the 1800s, the 9 principles that still ring true today when it comes to effective policing, basically built on the tenets that our ability to enforce the law effectively depends on the public's approval of our actions. And so we really need to have that symbiotic, cohesive relationship with the public. That is the foundation for community policing. And, we need to work with the public to reduce the crime. And as has been stated, the perception of crime, which sometimes that can be a more daunting task. A lot of times, and we'll find out through our communications, our interactions with the citizens, that they have a perception that isn't reality based on our statistics or our experiences. And we need to share with them that we need to share the truth with them that their perceptions are false or that misleading, and basically educate the public on what we know so that we can have that relationship together. So no, they play a critical role in us effectively targeting crime and making the community safer overall.
Chief, you said that very succinctly and very well, so thank you for that. Can you, anything you can share, given your experience in Joliet and now in Mokena, in terms of the role that the community plays in the delivery of police service that's different from a large community to a smaller community?
Well, I think it's a little more difficult for a chief to manage that communication. In order to be effective in our role as a leader of an organization like a police department or in public service as a whole, you really have to get out there and have those face-to-face contacts with the stakeholders in your community on a regular basis, whether it's your church leaders, whether it's your business leaders, your neighborhood watch groups, the people that actually are able to filter information coming up from the citizens to you. You really have to have that one-on-one contact. At the same time, going out to different groups like Kiwanis Club, Lions Club, Exchange Club, Rotary, those interactions, are key to be effective in trying to share the message, share your efforts. Back in my experience, we always did a comp staff. You did your computer statistical driven analysis on where to deploy resources, but the public doesn't know that unless you go back and share with them in these public forums on how you're doing that, so that they understand you're using intelligent policing as a response to targeting the crime in their area. So again, the person-to-person conversations are critical in order to be effective at what you're doing.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Let's kick on to the second question. Deputy Chief Goss, can you talk about the strategies that Daytona Beach implemented or used for managing community expectations?
Communication is number one. You have to, like Chief Benton just said, you have to put out what the police department is doing when you're trying to set up the level of expectations. We do ComStat also. They still do ComStat. It was always a public meeting. We hold it in a public forum. The public can come and they cannot. But beyond that, you have to get into the community and talk to the people that aren't available to come to those meetings and the people that aren't going to go on your website. So when you're talking to them, like I said before, you have to be honest with them. Because the public will have a high level of what they expect the police department to do. You have to provide them with the information to let them know what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, and then what they can in return expect from you. So from our department, it's 2021. It's constant communication and constant accessibility. The community nowadays needs to feel that they can access your police department. They need to feel they can talk to whoever it is that they feel the need to talk to. And it can be very time consuming and it can be very cumbersome, but you have to be accessible, you have to communicate, and you have to get the people that work with you to do the same also. I was always a big proponent. If I went to a community meeting and we went through a ton, I would always take an officer with me. I would take an officer from that zone. I would take a detective that works that area, because number one, they can provide a lot of good input that me as a leader, that me as a manager may not know. I should know it, but there's going to be things that deputy chiefs, and captains don't know. They can provide some insight into that, but not only that, but we talk about community policing, and for people that have been in community, and I know I'm running a little bit long, but for people that have been in community policing for a long time, it's not new. Everybody thinks that it's new. It's not. Community policing has been around for a very long time. So when the officers see how important these needs are and what the community expects for them, it can help them raise their policing level to try to meet those expectations more. And then hopefully that will filter back out to the rest of the rank and file once they can experience it for themselves.
Were you dealing a lot, Scott, on this notion of perception of crime versus the reality of crime in Daytona?
Absolutely.
And how did you manage those?
Communication and data. You know, CompStat is a great tool, and whether you want to call it CompStat, data-driven policing, however you want to call it. But when you have these personal interactions, number one, you need to know the facts. You need to know the numbers that you're talking about. But I would always explain to them in simple terms. You know, listen, I understand your concern about car brakes, for instance, because historically we have an issue with car brakes in Daytona. My new chief's gonna not like me saying that, but it's true. So when you're explaining to them, listen, we're working on it. We have detectives assigned to it. We have officers assigned to it. This is what we're doing, but keep in mind, you know, we had 200,000 extra visitors in town this weekend in a city with a population of 70,000, and we had 8 car breaks. I know all 8 were in your neighborhood, and I know that doesn't make you very happy, but we have to keep this in focus here as far as what's going on. But on the good side, we had no person shot this weekend. We had no stabbings this weekend, and domestics were down. So you don't shift the focus away. I think you just have to paint a broad picture to show them exactly where the problems are, what you're doing about them. And, you know, sometimes though you have to fall on the sword and say, you're right, this is a huge problem and we need to do more to fix it.
Yep. That helped a lot. Your points, your main points, communication, accessibility, and honesty, I think ring through for any event in any community. So I think you phrased that really well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Chief Benton, can you talk about the strategies that you're employing in Mokena for managing resident expectations?
I was having trouble with my unmute button. As Chief Goss just said, it's really important to have those open lines of communication, attendance at a lot of the public meetings, neighborhood association meetings. Like I said before, civic organizations, those are critical. Post-event response surveys sent out, any interactions that you've had with your community, or take a random sample and monthly send out surveys. How was the police service? Were you happy with it? Is there any way that we can improve? It's important that you constantly take that pulse of the community and try to determine how satisfied they are with your service delivery as a department. Community policing officers, crime prevention officers, whatever their role are in your department, and their supervisors they got to embrace that opportunity to constantly talk with the block captains and again, the church officials, business owners. They have to ensure that those officers also relay any information that they have, any conversations that are relevant up the chain so that the administration can stay informed. We all have to know the same things because we're dealing with that public that it's going to expect us to be responsive, whether it's the line level officer or the administration. We all have to have that same empathy and be assured that we're working towards a successful, resolution of whatever their problem happens to be, whether it's car burglaries or shootings or it's just parking issues. We have to recognize that individual may have a critical or a concern over this incident. It may not be critical in the scheme of things, but that to them, it's the most important thing that deserves your attention. As taxpayers, they deserve that same level of response if we can provide it. So I know sometimes it's difficult to prioritize it, but we have to do that if we're going to expect them to trust us and support us. And in this day and age, public support is so critical for us in this job.
Yeah, I agree with you. It'd be interesting, and I hate to keep bouncing back to your days in Joliet, but I am kind of curious, the level of connecting with the community that you were doing personally as chief, as the leader of the department, in helping to manage and communicate those messages. What's the biggest difference between working in the community that you're in now and working in the larger organization where you had a lot more chain of command?
Yeah, I think it's probably just my own learning curve, trying to find out who those stakeholders in the community are. The businesses are easy enough to go to. without organized groups that are having regular meetings. It's just more of trying to immerse yourself in the community, find out who the informal leaders are, see who the vocal residents are that are trusted by the people on their block or in their area. It's night and day going from 150,000 to 20,000 people. But I've found that word travels quick in the smaller communities, and that's helpful for us. So we can get the message out on what we're doing a lot easier here on the smaller community. So I'm really looking forward to immersing myself more in involvement with the stakeholders here and trying to have those regular open lines of communication.
Yeah, that's interesting. But the messages that you're hearing are probably fairly much the same. It's just the scale of the messages. Is that fair?
And the types of crime are different here, fortunately. I mean, I'm only 25 miles down the road, but Joliet was a very diverse, large community with a high crime area in certain parts of town, but more affluent in other parts. And fortunately, Mokena has a relatively low crime rate. And so the concerns are different than we've experienced in the past. And but again, like I just said, you have to understand that citizen, maybe dealing with a parking issue that is a critical issue for them that we have to prioritize.
Yep, totally hear you. Thank you so much. Chief Manoushagian, can you talk about the strategies that you're using for managing community expectations in Lake Worth?
Sure. So I think the first step is we have to be out in the community in order to receive and understand what those expectations are. And as the chief executive, you certainly play a predominant role in that, but your command staff does as well. So, all the way down to your first line supervisors and even those officers within your department who are informal leaders. Everybody has to be engaged. It has to be a department-wide strategy. And then there has to be internal lines of communication to get that information back to the top. Those things are actionable by the chief mostly. And so we have to know in order to do something with it. So once we understand what the expectation is, then it becomes an issue of how do we respond? What do we do about it? And then, we've talked about a number of strategies, problem-oriented policing, intelligence-based policing. There's a number of things that you can apply to that. And I am of the mind that the best police leaders are well-versed in a number of different tactics and strategies, and they apply them to the right areas based on the right information. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It bothers me sometimes when I hear a blanket statement like, we use community-oriented policing, as if that's the only thing that we use, because I don't believe that that's effective all the time. I believe we need to apply different strategies to different environments at different times. And then once we've applied a strategy and addressed the problem, then it becomes about feedback, as we've talked about already. How do we let the community know what we've done about it? How do we let the council and mayor know what we've done about it so that they can communicate it back to the community on our behalf? One of the things I've learned in my time as a chief is how important consumability of information is. So, we work really hard and we create like an annual report, and we just pump all of this data into a document that explains what we've done and how we've approached crime. But the fact is that 20-page document is not going to be read by very many people at all. And so how do we get the really important stuff to the end consumer, to the resident, in a way that they comprehend it? And one of the things that we did is we took our annual report and we created little infographics that we distributed on social media. And there were about a dozen or so. One highlighted a reduction in burglaries. And we sent that out and we just let that sit for a day. So the only thing folks in the community were consuming from the police department that day was that the Lake Worth Police Department reduced burglaries by 68%. And we just let it sit. And then the next day we came out and we released another statistic, violent crime down 11%, and we let that sit. And we did that. We created a timeline that worked backwards from the release of the annual report. So, if we knew the annual report was going to be released on the 9th, we went back 12 days and we released one thing every day leading up and building anticipation for this report. And even if nobody read the final report, they at least saw these highly consumable infographics along the way that painted a picture of what the police department was doing. And the hope was that they walked away feeling like they heard me and they've done something about it. Great job. Now I'm scrolling or moving on to the next issue in my life.
Yeah, that's very creative. I hope I may prod you a little bit on the next question.
Sure.
Because I think that is a really creative thing. I mean, we have found so much success in with these panel conversations of people visiting them just to learn a little bit more about it. And you're doing pretty much the same thing, maybe in a different graphic, but you're giving people small consumables. And I think that's a really solid way of helping to communicate important messages so that people, as Scott was talking about it, the notion of trust and communication and honesty and communicating in whatever ways work. So congratulations on that. It's really very cool.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the third question. And Chief Benton, I'd like to start with you. Chief Benton, can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using in Mokena to understand resident sentiment and to what their priorities are? And, if there's anything you could share about how you're measuring the performance of the department?
Sure. Yeah, well, obviously the main one is feedback to your elected officials. They can be critical, as of course they're quite visible in the community, and other events like the coffee with the cops or community encounters are key. One area that I think that here in Mokena we're a little lacking is there is no social media presence. I was a little surprised to find that here. One of the things I did back in Joliet was created a marketing and communications committee, and now with the department, with civilian staff of and sworn over probably 330 some people, there's a lot to draw from in the skill set in terms of how to package and push out some of our messages. So we had some really talented people that came up with some great ideas on sharing our victories and sharing our accomplishments, and also warning about crime concerns. And that was all through social media, whether it's a department website, through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever source there was. Just basically trying to highlight the good that the police department is doing so that we can have those small victories in the public. And at the same time, it provides an opportunity to the public to give you that feedback that you need or ask questions or what have you. I really love the chief's idea about the infographic. I had to write it down to be able to push those out. It's something I'm going to try to do here, but I think that that's a key component that we're going to move towards here in Mokena now, is to use social media as the platform that most people, quite frankly, nowadays rely upon, and do so in a way that they can feel like their voices are being heard and provide that two-way feedback.
Chief Mokena, I'm sorry, Chief Benton.
Sure.
In Mokena, I think probably the best decisions I've ever made as a city manager was establishing communication departments and formal communication systems so that you can tell your own story. So congratulations on doing that. I think that's a very wise move, and I'm sure.
Thank you. And it has to be top to bottom all the way up. You have to have line level officers. You have to have civilian staff. Everybody's got a different story to tell to highlight the good in the police department, and they should all be included in that message, I think. So thank you.
Yeah. Do you have any system in place, or does the department have any systems in place for tracking your performance in any kind of a formal way?
Like data collection, you mean? Statistical
data or however you're kind of collecting information just to kind of assess your performance?
Yeah, nothing formal. It's all informal.
Yeah. Does the council do annual strategic planning effort for kind of laying out projects for the next couple of years?
Now, I don't know that it's consistent, so it's something that we're working towards. There's really a whole new group of department heads that have come together over the last year. So again, I'm the most recent one to come in and learn a lot as we go. But some of these conversations, that's the plan that we're moving towards. A lot of us now are doing our individual SWOT analysis within our own departments. We're going to plan on bringing it back, and ultimately, that's the next step: is a 3 to 5 year plan. All of us get on the same page and move towards the future.
I totally agree. And, you brought up earlier, this whole notion of that the organization has to be supportive of the direction that the communities or the direction that the organization is going. I mean, both Scott and JT brought up that exact issue where you can't do it as chief, regardless of your background. You really need to have that organization behind you so that you're all kind of, in Minnesota, we call it rowing the boat, right? And that's so totally true. So you're not unique in the sense that there's a lot of communities that don't have formal systems in place. I bring it up only because I think that with all of the community challenges that are being confronted by police departments, if you don't have a system in place, you're going to be run by the perceptions that people have around your performance. And
I agree. That's true. And like Jim Collins says in Good to Great, you got to get the right people on the bus before you get the bus to pull away.
Right.
So we're working on that now.
Thanks a lot, Chief.
Thank you.
Chief Manoushagian, can you talk about some of the tools and methods that you're finding successful for understanding resident expectations and priorities? I'd particularly be interested in any techniques or tips using the canine experience that you've had, as well as just how to reach those harder to reach populations.
Sure. I'll start off first by talking generally about social media, and there will be a canine intersect, I promise. So one of the things that we have found most beneficial to connect with the community, to engage with the community, to understand and manage perceptions has been, without a doubt, social media. We found that each platform offers a different reach. So we're reaching a different age group, different demographic, in some cases, even a different geographic location by platform. So we reach one group by Facebook, another group by Instagram, another group by social media, by Twitter, and then a whole nother group by something like Nextdoor. And so it was important that we have a communication strategy that was consistent, and then we applied it in our own unique way according to what consumers want on each one of those platforms. So social media was key. We have a team of people that take care of that. I call them the PRO team. That stands for Public Relations and Outreach team. And these are our internal men and women who are talented and gifted when it comes to being digitally aware. And so we give them the tools and the freedom to carry on the department's message. So social media has been incredible. During the pandemic, we kind of reached a crossroads where we had to figure out, okay, we're not going to be able to meet in the traditional sense anymore. We're not going to be able to do coffee with the cop. We're not going to be able to host community forums. So what do? How do we connect with the community? And so we came up with this idea, what we ended up calling Friday Briefing. And Friday Briefing is when I would do a Facebook Live segment, and I would kind of push out the updates and announcements, different community events that were going on, our response to certain crimes, and then we would engage in a Q&A. So we would allow people to type in a question, and I would respond directly to that question live. So there was no pretense, there was nothing rehearsed. And the first few, and even now, they're still a little rough, but that provides a really authentic element that our community seems to enjoy. So everywhere I go, somebody says, "Hey, I saw you on Friday Briefing. Thank you so much for doing those. Those are great." And these are people that I've never met, but yet I've connected with them. They feel connected to me. They feel like they know me. They feel like they know the police department, all because of social media and how we reach them through those various platforms. We've also done community surveys. We're really unique here in Lake Worth that we have a small resident population and then a very large, highly transient population during the day. So we only have about 6,000 people who physically live in the city. But as I mentioned earlier, we have about 250,000 people who come through daily. So they have two different levels of expectations, and how you reach them is a challenge. When we host a community forum, residents come to that and we can connect with them, but we're missing a whole nother group. So how do we reach them? Social media has been the key. And when we conduct these surveys, we assess both independently so that we can develop a strategy that's kind of targeted towards those two different groups. When we are able to have in-person events, we do something called community conversations, which is a panel discussion. We put up command staff, line level, first line leaders, civilian staff, and we invite the community in. We have some food available, and we go through just a small scripted kind of presentation to them. And then we make ourselves available for just pointed questions. And that is our way of being vulnerable, putting ourselves in a position to be put on the spot, and just being vulnerable and transparent with our community. That is a part of an initiative we started called the Trust Through Transparency Initiative. That's a whole segment on our website that we target just to being open and honest. That was another something else that's been a successful strategy. You talked earlier about strategic planning. We had a strategic plan when I took over as the police chief, but the city didn't have a strategic plan. And so what that meant was we were moving in a certain direction, but that wasn't necessarily in line with the direction that the city was going. So a recent exercise that we've just gone through is participating with the city, with the council and mayor to develop a citywide strategic plan. And then now we're going to be able to take a step back as a police department and develop our own strategy that is in step with the city. So we're all moving in that same direction.
Congratulations, number one, on your leadership. On the strategic planning thing specifically, the leadership that you're doing in the department, kind of the peer pressure that you've got to be kind of a broader organizational thing. I used to tell all of my employees that you all are involved in public safety in one way or another. So congratulations on kind of getting to that overall strategic planning initiative. I love the Facebook Live work. Do you have any sense for how many people are attending those virtually?
So we have anywhere between 30 and 50 who join and actually watch the live broadcast, but we have in the thousands that come back and watch it after the fact. So it's the live interaction is a component, and I don't always do them live. Sometimes if I'm pressed for time, that's the best way. So we do record some ahead of time. And then we push those out. Those are more widely watched because we can get those on YouTube and Instagram and different platforms, where if we just do a Facebook Live, it kind of lives just on Facebook. Yeah. But overall, they are widely viewed. And even if the metrics were a little misleading, like if you went back and you looked at your insights from social media to assess whether or not it was effective, that's kind of one thing. But then if you step out into the community, I'm not joking when I tell you, every person I come across, the Friday briefing comes up in conversation. So that's very cool. It leads me to believe that they're watching it and it is effective.
Yep, that's very, very cool. It almost becomes a community expectation over time. Super, way to go.
Thank you.
Deputy Chief Goss, can you talk about the tools and methods that you used in Daytona Beach, or that Daytona Beach is currently using, for getting resident needs and priorities and for tracking performance?
It's going to be very, very similar to what the previous two chiefs said. First thing is social media, because we are we're on a larger scale because of a lot of the events and just where we are geographically. We use every platform of social media. I think in 2021, if an agency is not using social media, or at least planning on how they're going to interject their agency in social media, they're starting to miss out, because, I mentioned earlier about accessibility. The community wants accessibility. Part of that accessibility they get is through social media. And we found through a lot of conversations with people that if they do not have that interaction on social media, they almost feel cheated, if you will, a little bit, because they can have it. We have it now, a society and a generation that relies on instantaneous information. So if the police department, the people that respond to things instantaneously, aren't able to give them their information that they feel they need instantaneously, it can kind of, honestly, I've seen people get very angry about it. So we use all the social media platforms. We use forums for discussion, such as Comstat. We make those public. A lot of promotional ceremonies, award ceremonies, stuff like that, we make open to the public. Public meetings and live meetings, those kind of go in hand with the forums. The problem that we saw with that was it was similar to city commission meetings. You get the same 10, 15, 20 people showing up with the same 10, 15, 20 problems. That although some of them were valid problems, a lot of them were not real issues. So I felt they were taken away for it. So we started this last year when the current chief took over, and it was a very simple park, walk, and talk. Every day, each shift had to do a park, walk, and talk. And when I had the meeting with the lieutenants, because when we first started it, I was the captain, the patrol captain. I got some grumblings, I got some looks about it. And by the end of the second week, they were loving it. The men and women were loving it. The community was loving it. And then you add in that not only was I going to be out there as the captain and then the deputy chief, but my chief was going to be out there and he was going to come and walk around with us. And then sometimes me and him would just meet up and we'd go for a walk. There was no policing about it. It was just basic human interaction. And especially in those neighborhoods that aren't going to go on social media, those ones that aren't going to travel. You know, you see an older couple sitting on your front doorstep, go up and talk to them for a little bit. But what we started seeing after that was a very organic thing. We started seeing the old cop pulling over and playing basketball with some kids. We started seeing playing catch or just standing around and goofing off. A push-up challenge. You know, they would challenge them in the basketball courts to a push-up challenge. It became fun. And now it's something that's truly in our community. And it's went from being something that the men and women didn't want to do to now it's something that they just do it. We don't have to worry about it. In fact, before I even retired, I stopped having the lieutenants send me the emails on it because I knew they were doing it. I could see them. And then we got the feedback. And when you give the officers freedom to do that, it takes on a whole different meaning. And then if you're open and transparent as a command staff, you'll get the backflow of information back up through the chain of command, or you'll get it firsthand because you'll actually be out there. And I know police managers are busy, but just taking 15 minutes, it can be a change. So where we measured the metric as far as what impact we were having was the traditional, the crime stats, the surges. If the surges stop, we make an arrest because we do a team approach. So it's CID, patrol, community policing, code enforcement, we're all in ComStat together. You would see that, but then to me, where you would really see it is when the residents would say, hey, I know this neighborhood still got some issues, but we know you guys are out here. We know the men and women are walking around. We see them 24 hours a day. And thank you. We're just happy that you're trying. And that, as somebody who spent 20 plus years in one agency with one community, that means more, I think, than any measurable metric that we can put out. And it makes you want to do more yourself.
Yeah, that's a really, really cool story, Scott. Thanks for sharing that. Just that notion that people interaction, it kind of ties into the Palin principles that you guys were talking about earlier. where you really are getting to know people in just a different level, so that you have that mutual respect. And as Chief Benton talked about, you need to have that trust. The society is based around that trust and acceptance of what you do, and you do it through human relations, right? I mean, sounds like that's a perfect example of that.
Well, and you'll go from one or two guys on a shift getting information about a violent crime to all your people getting information on the shift, because during these park walk and talks, they've all made different connections with different people. And I really like the pro team for the social media, because another problem that police managers will always talk about is how do we engage millennial employees, which is a whole separate topic. Let them do what they're good at, which is social media. They trust me, my 15-year-old can manage Instagram way better than I ever can. So take a 20-year-old new cop. Hey man, here's your chance. We're going to vet everything you do. We're not going to let you go wild, but go find me some good stuff. I want positive and I want real.
That's so super. Thanks. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. This has been a great conversation. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. I would love to just kind of open it up and see if any of you have any additional comments that you want to share, or have questions for each other.
And I just realized I forgot to touch on canine if you wanted to
Yeah, I wouldn't.
conversation on that.
Yeah, please.
Sure. So using canine to connect with the community is using a natural connection. So there are not many people on the face of the planet who don't love dogs. And so it's often said that the fastest way to get a group of kids to come off of a fire truck is to bring out the canine. So it is just something that people love. So why as police would we not capitalize on that? You know, it's important that we have strong social police dogs. We don't want the, level 10, you can't come near it kind of thing. So we want dogs that people can approach and pet and interact with. Our canine unit has its own Instagram page that allows people to connect with them in a really unique way. And it's all about positivity. So we don't do anything that is snarling teeth, no, drool, nothing that's really aggressive. It's all very positive and stoic. And, it reflects well on the police department. I would encourage anybody who doesn't have a canine unit to consider it, if for nothing else, this reason alone of engagement.
That's very well said. I've been around canine units my entire career and couldn't agree with you more. The opportunity for engaging with a broader portion of your population, it brings everyone out. So totally agree. Scott?
And also, like what the chief was just saying, there's a reality to that. And the reality to that is that sometimes police work is messy. And we have to remember that. And if you look at your community relations, kind of like a banking account, we make deposits. Sooner or later, we're going to have to make a withdrawal. And somebody on one of these social media platforms is going to catch one of those canines, and not catch in a bad way, but witness that canine doing his job. But you're not going to have the historical perception of what the dog was doing, because the community leaders have seen these dogs. They've interacted with these dogs. They've done this stuff. I mean, we've taken our canines on the park walk and talks before, because we too have very highly sociable canines. That can be a big asset for that time that they do get to witness them making that apprehension.
Yeah, I agree. I hear a lot of building that bank account up from people who've been on this panel. You can't start engagement when you're in the middle of a storm. So being proactive and building those relationships ahead of time and on a regular basis through whatever mechanism you have is just such a critical part of being successful, and being able to pull some of the points out when things don't go exactly the way you want. Anything to add, Brian?
Oh, I'm just getting some great ideas from the fellow chiefs here. I appreciate your sharing your thoughts and ideas, and it's going to help me moving along here in my new role. Thank you.
Well, that's great. Let me kind of wrap this up in the interest of time. This has been a really good conversation. As I mentioned beforehand, I just get this great honor of talking to leaders around the country on thing that is such a critical thing for communities, and engagement is such a core part of being part of a community. So thanks for everything that you shared. I mean, you've all been doing great engagement in whatever manner that you're doing. Really appreciate the values that you talk about around trust, communication, honesty, transparency. You have to have those things in place. And the way that you do that is by making the connections either in person, through social media. I mean, all of you are really being creative in how you're getting to your population. So really thankful that you were able to share a lot of really creative ideas. All of these kind of approaches that you're taking, it just leads to building stronger communities. And this was just a wonderful panel that we're going to be able to share a lot of great insights with other people. So thank you. Just kind of in final wrap up, I will get you the contact information for each other so that if you have any follow-ups on details of things that somebody brought up that you want to get more information on, you'll be able to do that easily. If you have somebody that you think would be good at this panel, I do these every Tuesday. And so I'm always looking for people that that are doing creative and successful engagement that you think is important to be shared with others. So I appreciate you sharing any of that. You will start getting, start seeing these highlight segments on LinkedIn probably within the next week and a half. When I see them, I'll send them your way so I can make sure that you see them. The whole purpose is to share ideas. And so really appreciate you taking those segments and sharing them with your LinkedIn network as well. People who know you and respect you will be able to take advantage of the insights and ideas that you have. And then I'll follow up with you at some point over the next week or so. I'd love to just get some feedback from you on what I might do differently for improving these panel conversations, as well as I've started to more aggressively ask about other topics that we should be exploring in the law enforcement world. What are the things that local leaders in law enforcement need to know about or need to have conversations around? If you have any ideas about that, I'll prompt you when we connect in the next several days or so. So with that, thanks for being part of this. Really an excellent conversation. I love meeting leaders in local law enforcement. It's one of the best things that I get to do every week. So thank you.
Thank you for setting this up, Matt. We really appreciate being a part of it.
Gentlemen, be safe out there.